If you have played Pokeclicker for any reasonable amount of time, then you'll know just how important breeding is. With it being your only way of increasing Pokemon attack, you're almost always going to be hatching eggs. This video will go over ways of gaining steps, with those methods ranked worst to best, and various other mechanics that affect egg hatching and steps gained. Since you gain steps from defeating Pokemon, there isn't much variety in hatching farms. Where you farm isn't very complicated because most of the time you just go to the highest dungeon, route, or gym you can one-shot. The different farming methods are rather the way you defeat the Pokemon, as there can actually be a sizable difference in hatching speeds depending on how you do so. But we will also cover which location types are the best and other things related to hatching. Also, as a general rule, only farm what you can defeat in one click or DPS tick. It isn't worth it to get slightly more steps from a stronger Pokemon, when you can just defeat two weaker ones in the same time span and get nearly double the steps. So before we list off the different hatching methods, let's look at how oak items and the farm can help you. When it comes to oak items, there are only a handful of items that will benefit you for hatching, but the one you always want to have equipped is the Blaze Cassette. This is because the Blaze Cassette grants you 2 times hatching speed at max level, which is too good to pass up. The other oak items can be swapped out and are situational, but the other items that will help you are the Rocky Helmet, Experience Share, Shiny Charm, and the Spray Duck. The Rocky Helmet will be used to help pass one-click thresholds for later gyms or routes. The Experience Share is to more quickly get your Pokemon to level 100. This isn't needed if you are breeding a lot of Pokemon, but it is very useful if you are hatching a small group of specific Pokemon. The Shiny Charm is if you are trying to get shiny Pokemon. That's pretty much about it. The Shiny Charm brings the hatching odds from 1 in 1024 to 1 in 512. Hatching is your go-to methods for shinies, as it is the highest odds you can get. Shiny Pokemon grants you some achievements and extra click damage. And finally, the Spray Duck is purely just for more quickly growing your farm setups, which we will get into now. The most powerful boost you can get comes from the farm. With certain setups, you can get nearly 3 times hatching speed on top of the Blaze Cassette, but there are multiple ways you can set up your farm, so let's look at them. Also, as a side note, try to grow the berries in sync with one another. For example, if you are trying to grow both lum and chople berries, wait until the chople berries have 1 hour left and then plant your lum berries. This is so you can maximize the time you got with all bonuses active. It is highly recommended you go for some sort of farm setup while hatching, as these can speed up the process immensely. If you don't have the berries listed, the berries and their associated mutation methods are on the wiki, which is super helpful. I'll have it listed in the description. With the previous information being listed, we can now get into the different hatching methods.
They're just looking at you.
So with steps only being gained by defeating Pokemon, you may be wondering why the Safari Zone is on this list. Well, if you didn't know, you can actually gain steps, a massive base 1 step with every step you take in the Safari Zone. Congrats, you now know about this pointless and useless fact. You can only gain steps when you actually move, so you can't just hold down the movement key and walk against the wall to AFK farm. Another thing is the random Pokemon that spawn outside the grass. Since they randomly spawn around the place, there is a chance it can spawn in your way or force an accidental encounter. I honestly ain't got much more to say about this besides the fact you seem to have infinite steps to walk, unlike the Safari Zones in mainline Pokemon games. It's literally just walking in one direction, and it is about as simple as it is useless. The benefit of using your Pokemon attack to defeat mons is that you have way more damage than clicking, meaning you can go to higher regions to farm. The bad thing about this is you're limited to defeating 1 Pokemon a second, not counting the faster DPS of the Battle Frontier. So while you gain more steps when you defeat a Pokemon, the rate at which you do makes defeating Pokemon with clicks just better. The highest base steps gained from a Pokemon is 19 in Galar. The health of these Pokemon takes clicking out of the equation, whereas the highest route in Kanto has a base step of 5. So as long as you can click 4 times a second, you are already on par with that. And 4 clicks a second is on the very low end of what you could do with clicking. If you are capable of clicking faster, such as 8 or 10 clicks per second, then you can get way more hatches more quickly. Kanto isn't even the only region available for one-click farming, so that step output can get better. Whenever you do DPS farming, I recommend going for the highest route or gym that you can one-shot. Gyms are better because you get slightly higher base steps, but if you can't afford the auto battle, then stick to the highest route. Stay away from dungeons as you don't encounter many Pokemon as quickly. Anyways, the main benefit of DPS farm is that you can AFK with it. However, if you want the fast hatches, there are better options.
Help! Help!
Depending on your clicks per second and your click damage, this is a very good method overall. If you aren't able to reach high stages in the Battle Frontier, I would say this is the best farm for you. Now with click farming, you have 3 options: dungeons, routes, and gym trainers. Out of the 3, I would say gyms are your best option. Gyms do give slightly more steps for defeating when compared to the route Pokemon, along with other benefits. Trainer Pokemon also give 50% more XP, meaning you can more quickly get your mons to level 100 to rebreed. This is especially helpful if you're only hatching a small group of specific mons. While also not being related to egg hatching itself, they do give more gems and do give more money, so you have multiple farms in one. My only complaint for this farm would be that 1 click goes to restarting the battle, which is more noticeable if the trainer has a small team of like 2 mons. This can be countered if you turn on auto battles unlocked at 100 clears, but this may not be an option if you don't have much money. Also, while not being a big problem, gym Pokemon have more HP than route Pokemon, so it's harder to pass 1 click thresholds compared to route Pokemon. You may have to stick to lower route gyms, however the step output should stay on par with the higher routes. Dungeons, if you're trying to just hatch, I would strongly not recommend. You get the same steps as route Pokemon, but now it takes way longer to defeat a bunch of mons quickly. Rather than clicking 10 times a second and getting all those steps, you have to search a dungeon, greatly lessening the mons you defeat in quick succession. While I think gyms are your best option, you can go with routes, they are pretty similar. Mess around with both and see which more to your liking. Battle Frontier is basically better DPS farming, but has the potential to be the best farm in the game. The higher stage you are, the more steps and gyms you gain. The problem being, the Battle Frontier starts off with bad step gains, and later on when you get into the hundreds, it gets way better. This means the strategy can either be the best, average, or bad. If you want to efficiently farm this method, whenever you start 2-shotting Pokemon, just quit out and restart again. What makes the Frontier really good especially is any stage you have beaten will have you deal damage in 0.5 seconds, rather than the normal 1 second for your Pokemon attack to activate. This farming method is the best, but really only if you're already capable of getting extremely high stages, which you will need damage in the millions for. Always have an X attack active as they work in the Battle Frontier as well as the Yellow Flute, but that is optional. I would stick with click farming for active farming if you can get high stages, and DPS farming for if you want to AFK hatch. Because hatching is pretty much just defeating Pokemon, the farming methods fall into pretty broad categories. While I did go over whether gyms, dungeons, or routes were better, I would like to take an individual look at each of them and list the positives and negatives if any. Gyms I would say are the best for when hatching small groups of Pokemon. This is because of the extra XP they give. They do give higher steps, but this is usually around 1 to 5 more steps compared to nearby dungeons and routes, so it really isn't that much of a difference. Not being able to auto battle until 100 clears does hinder it, while also requiring money each clear does make it sometimes a hassle to AFK farm. If you really want to min-max your hatch speed and are hatching a specific small amount of mons, then I would say that's where gyms shine through. Routes are kind of a jack of all trades. They don't offer the XP and steps that gyms do, but they are very versatile and allow you to farm many other things in the process. Though gyms are best for mid-maxing, routes are pretty similar in hatch output, and it is the only location you can AFK farm with DPS damage for no cost. There isn't much of anything wrong with route farming, it just doesn't offer unique things that dungeons or gyms do, like dungeon drops or extra XP. Dungeons are the worst location you can hatch farm at, not because of step gaming or anything. It has the same amount of steps as routes for the most part, but rather the amount of Pokemon you encounter. Overlooking this, dungeon farming is a good way to farm dungeon drops for stuff like repeat balls or held items to further increase damage. Dungeon Pokemon also grant more EVs, so you will be seeing an increase in damage for those mons. It's not really good for hatching, but it does give good loot depending on the dungeon you farm. Overall, I would say gyms are best if you got money for auto battling, but routes are also very similar with step gains, so you can switch them out as you like. So now that we went over hatch methods and covered some of the basics such as the farm and oak items, let's go over another important hatchery mechanic. Hatchery helpers are essentially AFK hatching. They will gain steps and damage from hatching according to their listed percentages and efficiency bonus. Their efficiency bonus depends on the amount of eggs they have hatched, and the required amount of hatches will go up as their bonus gets higher. This bonus has a max of 50% at 125,000 hatches. Helpers also require a fee to hatch, which they will deduct every time they hatch an egg. If you run out of the required currency, the helper will leave and stop hatching until you rehire them again with the required currency. The max amount of helpers you can have hired at one time is 3. Helpers will automatically start hatching another egg once they have finished hatching. You can also have your helpers hatch by a category of your choosing. What is deemed available for them to hatch is dictated by whatever Pokemon you have shown in your hatchery. For example, if I sort my helpers to hatch by the highest base attack, but I want them to hatch only normal type Pokemon, I can go into my hatchery menu and filter by normal type so that it only shows normal type mons. The helpers will now only hatch what is shown on the menu, even if I have higher base attack mons of a different type. This is most clearly seen whenever you search up Pokemon. Helpers will only hatch those Pokemon even if it conflicts with their sorted category. I can have my helper hatch only the highest step Pokemon, but if I look up Magikarp, my helpers will only hatch those Magikarp despite me having 4,800 step Pokemon. Basically, helpers will only hatch what is currently selectable from the hatchery menu, and you can sort the manner in which they choose what to hatch. There are a total of 11 helpers in the game, all with different percentages and currency cost. The lowest tier helpers aren't good at all if you can afford the more expensive ones. If you're early game and can only afford the dungeon token and money helpers, then you can get a good boost in damage if you AFK hatch with them. The main ones you will use are the quest point, battle frontier, and farm point ones. Money and DT ain't worth it if you can avoid it, and diamond helpers, while good, are really costly to actively farm with unless you have tens of thousands of diamonds. So now that we have an understanding of how helpers work, let's rank them based on the currency they cost. Money hatchers are by far the worst. They are practically free in later regions, but their efficiency just makes them a chore to hatch with. Only hatch these guys if you are going for the achievements. DT helpers are better than money helpers, but mainly because of Dakota. DT tokens are easy to come by later on in the game, and Dakota's stats are decent if you want to AFK farm, but don't have much of the other currencies. Diamond helpers, if purely looking at their efficiency, would be second place. However, what places them low for me is the price. Diamonds are very hard to come across in mass, and really the only way you'll be actively farming with these helpers is if you do daily chains, which is a very lengthy process. Most of the time you won't be able to use these guys because you won't have enough diamonds to keep up. Their efficiency is good, but with the scarcity of diamonds they don't feel worth it, unless you are very rich. The farm point helper is overall decent. Just grow some decent farm point berries like Hondoos and you basically have passive currency income. The main strength of Cameron is you pretty much don't have to do anything to keep up with the cost as long as you keep growing good berries. The other helpers you can do this with don't offer good efficiency, and the good efficiency helpers like quest points and battle frontier points are going to have you at some point go out of your way to farm the currency. Quest point helpers will definitely be one of your main used ones. They offer good efficiency and they have an easy to come by currency assuming you can do underground quest. With the other categories there is always an objectively best helper if you could afford it, but here it's kinda split. Some would prefer the faster hatching while others the higher damage. I would say carry is the better option as Justice will whittle down your points for less return. Egg steps can be boosted with oak items in the farm, and they can be made hatch faster with carbos. So eggs are already pretty fast to hatch. Attack is gained in small quantities and it can't really be boosted as much, especially with the vitamin update switching everyone over to use carbos instead of vitamins. Both are good, and I would recommend using both if you can afford it, but I prefer carry over Justice just because Justice doesn't give good damage. The Battle Frontier helper, Noelle, I think is the best hatcher in the game. They are expensive early game, but as you increase your damage and get higher in the Frontier, this issue is lessened. Unlike the Diamond helpers, Noelle's efficiency is actually worth the price, doubling the damage you gain from any mons hatched from him. Farming Battle Frontier points is time consuming, but can be left to do its thing in the background, which is a plus. While in the Battle Frontier, you can also farm quest points, which I do by doing an underground quest, and farm points if you grow berries. Noelle just offers really good efficiency stats for a price that isn't that bad once you find yourself getting higher and higher stages, since the BF payout gets better the higher you go. If I were to recommend the 3 helpers you should use, it would be Noelle, Cameron, and Carrie. All 3 offer good efficiency, aren't too crazy expensive, and are of a different currency, so you aren't using up a lot of one currency. If you don't really use the farm for anything other than egg hatching setups, and don't have that many farm points, then you can swap out Cameron for Justice or Dakota. I also forgot to mention that hatchery helpers are unlocked after hatching a total of 100 Pokemon, and all of the hatchers aren't immediately unlocked, so here are the different requirements for unlocking all of them. Though trainers in general give you a 50% XP bonus when battling them, champions seem to give way more XP than nearby gym leaders, making them the best place to rebreed Pokemon back to level 100. Hatchery helpers actually charge you their price upon putting an egg in the hatchery, not once they hatch it. Though you typically have to fight to your max stage and lose to get your battle points, you can end a run early by filling your hatchery queue up to the max to nerf your damage and lose the run early. Though this will result in less points, the last stages of the run are the longest and the most drawn out. When breeding, I would recommend making your held item a Wonder Chest for all your Pokemon. This is so you get a 25% XP bonus, and Wonder Chests are pretty cheap, only costing 10,000 money. You aren't losing damage in the long run by not putting a held item that increases damage, since those items just give you a percentage increase based on your Pokemon's max damage. They don't increase the hatching damage bonus, and can be added after breeding to end up with the same overall damage. So now that we've gone over that, we can move on to the last and newly added hatchery mechanic. With the vitamin update came 2 new vitamins, calcium and carbose, and a change to how vitamins work. Previously, vitamins gave a flat +1 attack bonus to hatching, up to a max of 40 vitamins at the Galar region. Now they still have the same effect, however each vitamin adds an additional 20 steps to their eggs, adding a total 800 steps at 40 vitamins. Calcium functions similarly to vitamins, add an additional damage gained from hatching, but rather than +1 attack, they give +1% of base attack to hatching per calcium. In simple terms, the damage bonus you gain from hatching is 25% of the Pokemon's base attack. Adding the calcium brings this up to 26%, and up to 65% at 40 calcium. The easiest way to look at this would be to look at a Pokemon with base 200 attack. Normally, if you hatch it, you would gain an additional 50 attack. Adding the calcium would add 1% of 200 to the damage bonus, so you would get an additional 2 attack. And at 40 calcium, you would get 80 additional attack, alongside the base 50, bringing the total bonus to 130. Calcium also adds an additional 20 steps each and are unlocked at Hoenn. Carbos are unlocked at Unova and reduce the egg steps for hatching. It doesn't decrease it by a set amount, but rather seems to decrease it based on the base egg steps of the Pokemon. A Pokemon with base 4800 egg steps will have its steps decreased by 186, while base 2000 egg steps will have it decreased by 53 per Carbos. Carbos get better the higher the steps are of the Pokemon, and the effects are less tangible with low base steps. Carbos are also the most expensive vitamin, costing 10 million at max price, calcium at 5 million, and vitamins at 1 million. So now let's get into how to use them. For the most part, the best and most simple thing you can do is just stack 40 Carbos on the Pokemon. This will pretty much always get the highest efficiency unless the Mon has very low base steps like 800. Mixing different vitamins together can get you higher efficiency, but this of course can be a tedious process for each Pokemon without looking at outside resources. If you don't have Carbos unlocked, then Calcium should be used whenever a Pokemon has a base attack of over 100, as at this point it's effectively a better vitamin, albeit more expensive. Don't use Calcium if it's lower than 100, as then you'll be granted less than 1 attack, at which point just use a vitamin. As for the rest, just use vitamins as you would before the update. Now, if I were to go into detail on every Pokemon's most optimal vitamin mix, this video would go on forever. However, the community has made spreadsheets which tell you each and every Pokemon's most efficient mix. This is very convenient and I would highly recommend this Google spreadsheet, which I'll have linked in the description. Hopefully this guide was able to make hatching more effective for you. As I made this video, I quickly realized that egg hatching didn't really depend on location, but rather the method you defeat a Pokemon. This made it so that there wasn't as much variety as I wanted, and the methods were kinda broad. Nevertheless, I tried to cover as much as I could and go into as much detail as I could to make hatching the most optimized. I'll try and post more Pokeclicker guides in the future, so stay tuned.